Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is David Duffy. He's the CEO and co-founder of the Corporate Governance Institute. Welcome to the show, David.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Great. Well, hey, I was watching some videos that you guys had posted on your website, and I thought, boy, it'd be really good opportunity to bring you onto the show. Let's give the listeners a little bit of background about the Corporate Governance Institute, what you guys do, and maybe there's an opportunity for someone who's listening to maybe reach out to you guys for help.
Well, that'd be great. So we were founded in 2020 in the pandemic, and we identified an opportunity to develop and produce a diploma in corporate governance and in ESG last year, which we could sell globally because nobody else is doing it. So if you want to learn about corporate governance in most countries in the world, you've got to go somewhere physically. It could be Harvard, Wharton, INSEAD in France, or wherever. So we decided there's a niche market there, and thankfully there's a market in the niche, as they say. So far, we're now operating in 51 countries, which is astounding. And I think we've only about 170 countries to go in the world, maybe slightly less.
Yeah.
So we think there's a huge opportunity here. And I suppose what we bring here is to enable people to learn when they want, where they want. So if they're at home, we've even had people doing some modules in their car as they're traveling, which probably is not good for health and safety.
Maybe not the safest unless they're not driving.
But some of them have been, which is fantastic. 51 countries. So people come from everywhere, which is just terrific. And we're hugely kind of inspired by people who come to us, because the caliber of these people who come to us is just enormous. Like the head of the data commissioner in the UK, and so on. I can't name too many names, but you'd probably identify them too easily. But they're from the leading professional services practice from Japan, Vietnam, Paris, London, west coast of Canada, and even the USA. So it's fantastic, and we're onto something here, we think.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have only started like two or 3 years old now, a little over 2 years old, and wow, you guys have really taken off. It sounds like hit a niche in the market that was, there was a void there.
Well, I guess we're a disruptor in the market. I mean, look at our brand. It's not exactly the usual blue, gray, or black you might find with other kind of corporate governance organizations, and that's deliberate. We want to stand out, and we are standing out.
So you guys are located out of Dublin, Ireland, right?
We sure are, yeah. But we have people in France, we have people in Spain, we have people in Brazil, but the majority are here. The leadership team is in Dublin.
All right. Well, that's good. Well, we've got 2 Irishmen on the interview today, so we ought to make some good, we ought to cover some good ground here. Let's break down what corporate governance really is, David. I think there might be, some listeners who don't really understand the whole concept about corporate governance. So if we could, let's spend a little time and talk about that and what it means, what is it? What are who's involved with it? That kind of thing.
So corporate governance came into being after a guy called Robert Maxwell stole 400 million sterling from a company in the UK in the late 1980s, and it's moved on from then to be kind of mainstream now in organizations. And there is a harmonization now occurring around the world in what corporate governance is in terms of codes and standards. But in essence, corporate governance is how organizations are organized and managed from the board downwards. So if you don't get the board right, you don't have the right composition, the right skills, the right disciplines, and clarity on roles, you'll have an organization that won't be optimized. So the role of the board is typically an oversight role in larger organizations. Right. Clearly, if it's a family business, there's a bit of both here, because all the board could actually be the executive team as well, and that some people struggle with that, the role of the director versus the role of the executive. But the role of the board is to direct, and that's why people are called directors, amazingly enough. And the role of the executive management is to execute policy, to execute strategy in particular, and to lead and manage the organization. So there's a critical, I think, relationship here between the CEO and the chair and the board. and a critical relationship between the CEO and his own executive team, because they're there to do the board's business. And if people understand that, well and good. So the board sets things like the moral compass for the organization. They set the culture for the organization, and it's up then to the executive to begin to sort of disseminate that or cascade it down the organization. But they're there to oversee and hold the executive to account, and hold them to account on how we deliver on the strategy or the business plan for the year.
Gotcha. No, that's good. I mean, I think people don't really maybe understand the value of the board and the various members that make up a board of various companies. They maybe understand the CEO, the CFO, the CTO. Those are common, executive type leadership roles in an organization, but they're the executives that are, like you said, doing, executing the work that needs to be done. That's been the strategy that's been set up by the board. And the board members are, they could be non-executive members on a board, right? Where they're not, in the day-to-day trenches of the execution of the work, but they're supporting and sponsoring and advising the executive, right?
Yeah. I mean, interestingly enough, the most searched term in corporate governance on Google is, what is the difference between an executive director and non-executive director? So I will explain. The non-exec director is not employed by the company. They sit on the board because they're there because they have certain skills. It could be they understand how business is done in a particular country, like Canada or Mexico, or they're there because they understand merger and acquisitions, or they understand finance or whatever. And they're paid a fee. And generally, they're there on a contractual basis for 3 years. And some corporate governance codes would limit the amount of time they could spend on a board. So in the UK, the maximum term is 9 years. The executive director, they're employed by the company. They don't get paid a fee because they get paid under the employment contract, and they sit on the board as well. But you might have only 2 or 3 from the executive sitting on the board. And good corporate governance would say that there should be more non-executive directors on a board than executive directors, because you want objectivity, you want independence, and that's what non-execs bring, apart from a particular skill set they might bring as well. Because if you overload with exec directors, well, they could get smothered. They could smother the non-execs.
So what types of services are you offering the aspiring directors, or even seasoned directors that are, in those roles today?
So, it's interesting that a slight majority of people who are doing our programs are women, which is great to see. And what we offer is, I suppose, a soup to nuts view of what corporate governance is. So it's a framework.
Okay.
Most people who come to do our courses know something about corporate governance. They're all kind of seasoned professionals or work for large organizations like Coca-Cola and places like this. And they want to see, from A to Z, what they need to know. And that can cover the governance architecture. So how do you build governance structures? The governance handbook, which is the Bible for the board, and that lays out the various roles around the boardroom table. It depicts the various policies like a code of conduct or conflict of interest.
Right.
And then, we cover the role of the company director from a legal perspective, but also from a practical perspective. And having clarity that if you're on a board, what your role is. And some people confuse or aren't clear on their role on a board. They might say, well, I'm on a board here, but I don't know my role. But they have a legal role. They have fiduciary duties to carry out, apart from the fact they might be experts in ESG or M&A. And then we look at things like, risk, strategy, how do you evaluate the performance of a board? And also then, if you do our diploma in corporate governance, how do I get a job as a non-executive director? That can take time, and people always underestimate the effort to become a non-exec director, because, it's not who knows, it's not who you know, it's who knows you at the end of the day. And that requires visibility.
Gotcha. So you provide training materials and education for these aspiring directors and seasoned veterans to basically round out their full understanding of a good functioning board and all the elements associated with,
Yeah.
what's the best practices?
Yeah, so the diploma in corporate governance, it's developed by practitioners.
Hmm.
So on our faculty, these are all experienced NEDs or governance professionals. And in developing the diploma, I developed it with them, and they're all specialists in those areas I talked about. We then have a governance advisory council with people from around the world, from Canada to Australia to the Middle East to the Netherlands, who know and have some insight into what flies in their particular areas. And then we get that was accredited. Um, but we not only offer the diploma in corporate governance, we also offer each of those modules separately. So somebody just might think, well, I don't want to do the diploma; it's going to take me, forever,
Yeah,
or I can't afford it, or my company won't sponsor me, and they can pick like a module in risk. What do I need to know about risk as a director, or more importantly, what do I need to know about strategy? Because part
right.
of the director's role is to direct, and direct means where are we taking this organization.
Sure.
So it's all online. We don't run physical events. It's all online.
Okay. That's fantastic. Um, well, we talked a little bit about, corporate governance, what it really means into the business. The one of the biggest, I think, topics in the industry today is how is ESG driving the focus of boards today?
Well, when we developed the diploma in 2020 um, for our online version, which is Zoom and live faculty, we had 4 slides in ESG. And then the phone started ringing about a year later saying, do you have anything in ESG? So we developed a module in ESG, 3 hours long, and that was bought uh, quite a bit. But then people came along, we need more, we need more. So we developed the diploma in ESG, and we got experts from around the world to talk about, ESG and investment, ESG and risk, ESG and strategy, and all that. So it's like a tsunami. So if you're sitting on a board now, pre ESG, you might say it was easier, but now with ESG, it's much wider lens that a board needs to look through. So very simply, if I was to explain this to my mother, what is E? Well, do no harm to the planet and enhance it if you can. And with S, it's the same with people. Do no harm to people and enhance the lives of people if you can. So it's been driven by primarily, I think, governments and the investor community. So we've seen recently some investor groups and Shell taking legal cases against the individual directors because they haven't moved fast enough away from fossil fuels. Uh,
Mhm.
Aviva, which is a big UK pensions organization, they've invested in 1,500 organizations around the world. And they've said, look, if we don't see ESG as part of your strategy, we're going to seek board changes, we're going to seek removal of the CEO, or we just invest.
Right.
I mean, who wants to invest in BP now without seeing change? And
Yeah.
I was interested last week to see that they had profits of 30 billion last year, which is the same as most of the big resource companies. But they'd only spent 3.5 billion on renewable energy
Right. Right.
investment. So the investors, from BlackRock, you name it, all the big investors now are big push towards ESG because they're in, like, the pension funds don't want to be investing their money in organizations which are going down the tubes.
Right. Right. Well, okay. So if you're a board and you're, having more concerns or having a lot of questions about, what is your ESG strategy? I mean, you know, in my mind, somebody on the board needs to be responsible for helping deliver the strategy for the executives to implement, within the company. How is that, changing in that dynamic in the boardroom today with this ESG? Because as you mentioned, investors are pushing hard in this. Consumers are requiring it for products that they want to know that the companies they're buying products from are, you know, they're operating, in an efficient, sustainable way. What's the dynamic, effect now with this
Yeah.
new
So
situation?
what we're seeing is, uh, first of all, very few boards, and this is a generalization, know as much as they need to know. So the first thing is education. So
Right.
they might task a board member, maybe set up a board committee, an ESG committee, and a lot of the NASDAQ companies and New York Stock Exchange and London Stock Exchange companies have done that because they've had to. Because if the investors don't see some sense of ESG somewhere, they'll be worried.
Right.
And what we're seeing is that, certainly people doing our diploma in ESG, a lot of them are doing it because they've been told by their organization, find out about this stuff. What is it? What do we do?
Right.
Where do we start? Well, you start small, not big. And part of the job is to educate the board and perhaps educate the executive, and then eventually perhaps hire some of the executive level to figure out what they need to do. So, a lot of organizations saw ESG kind of as a bolt-on to strategy, 18 months ago. Now it needs to be integrated into it because it's part and parcel of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest challenge that I'm seeing in the industry, as a consultant, is that, a lot of companies are struggling to get their hands around the actual data that they
Yeah,
need to obtain to,
absolutely.
do the proper reporting.
Mm,
They have managed their businesses in a way that allows, I guess, individuality with, divisions or operating units. And there hasn't been, quote unquote, a requirement to manage this information more strategically, like through a platform where it can roll up into a system. There's been a lot of, you guys just make sure you're in compliance and don't get any NOVs and we're okay, right? Instead, now the whole landscape is changing in my mind.
Yeah, I think a big challenge if you're on the board is, and you're getting data about, I don't know, your carbon emissions or how close we to being, zero compliant is the data.
Right, right,
And where's that data coming from? Who's collecting it? What's the veracity of that data? Can we trust it?
right,
Uh, can we audit it? Who's audited it? Can we trust the auditors? And so on. So there's a new industry, developing there, and rightfully so. And the next big challenge is, how do they report this stuff in the annual reports? Because there are no standards as to how you present this information, but they're coming, and
right,
they're going to come quickly. And Europe is, I think, doing well there. And there's legislation gone through the European Parliament on that front, but it's early days,
right.
and it'll be the big companies first, and then it'll just cascade down to
Smaller
the
ones. I think that the challenge is really the digital transformation that some of these companies have to go through to consolidate systems, to have an effective tracking system. That is a huge management of change challenge for big companies.
And not only that, the top three skill sets looked for by boards typically are ESG, digitization, and cyber.
Right,
So if you're on a board now, and you might even think, well, if I'm being offered an opportunity to go on a board, I'd always say, see if they have an ESG strategy. If they don't, that's a warning sign that they're
red
not in.
flag.
Absolutely. They
Yeah,
also need to be solvent, of course, as well. That's helpful. You don't want to be involved in that. But yeah, so it's early days, and if you're looking at a career as a non-exec director, well, first of all, you need to have, I think, some sort of formal education in corporate governance, such as our diploma corporate governance. But what we're now seeing is some of the graduates are now doing the diploma in ESG, because that's going to advance their career as a non-exec director more quickly.
right. No, that's a great point, and it's great that you've established that your business with this a resource available for these aspiring directors and non-executive directors. I mean, I think it's really great because people don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn to for this type of education sometimes because it's not really something that's, you know, out there that, is easily you can't find it that easy.
No, it's hard. People might find it hard to find us as well. I don't know, but more people are finding us, which is great. Um, and
Well,
that's
that's
why.
why we're bringing you on the show today so we can get your message out. So,
Good. No, but I mean, we were a startup, and now we're making progress. But people still have to find us. So we produce, 3 pieces of content a day by 2 great journalists who are just getting on top of ESG, getting on top of diploma of corporate governance, and writing it in a way that it's easy to understand.
right.
you can complicate stuff if you want to, you know.
Well, right. You don't want to be in the weeds of the super technical aspects of, ESG and greenhouse gas emissions and the calculation requirements and all the engineering behind that. That's not the level that I think the executive needs to be. And they need to have a more of a higher level, 30,000-foot view and understanding of the process so they can ask the right questions of their staff to, execute on.
Yeah, and that's what a good NED does. So even if you don't have a background in ESG, a good non-executive will be asking, well, you know, do we have an ESG competence within the organization?
Right.
Um, if not, we should get one. We need that to educate the board, and we need that to figure out what our strategy should be. And you don't be an organization that's maybe listed that comes under scrutiny of the investors, and they figure out, well, these guys are going nowhere, and we need to find other places to invest our money.
Right.
And that could happen to BP quite quickly. Shell's being sued, as I said earlier on, for not moving quick enough. But I think we're going to see much more, activist investors saying, well, if all these big resource companies have all this money, they should put it to better use on behalf of the shareholders by investing in renewables.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about a lot of the big commitments that some of these companies have made, I mean, they've a lot of them have come out and said we're going to be, zero net carbon by 2050, right? Well,
Yeah,
that's a big commitment to make, and investors over time are going to want to say, okay, well, what's your progress of trying to achieve that commitment that you've committed to? And so, I can see why people are trying to hold people accountable for these things, and not seeing progress is probably, how, because it's a culture change in a business. I mean, they need to really retool their business to meet some of these goals that they've committed to. So it's going to be a big lift for some of these companies for sure, especially, these resource companies. So, um,
yes,
I was looking on your website. I really like some of the resources that are available to people that want to come and learn a little bit more about, ESG or corporate governance and things like that. That you can download some resources to get a little more educated, to get some better understanding of what the topics are, what they need to learn about, and it's really going to drive them back to you guys to maybe do a course.
yeah, and we offer the diploma in ESG you can buy the modules separately as well, and they're online, so you can get a 3-hour module, and there's a lot of resources you can download within that module as well. On, say, in the diploma in corporate governance, you can download, well, a template for a code of conduct, or a template for a conflict of interest policy, or
Right.
what does a CEO report look like? And we're adding, as people ask us, to the diploma in ESG, to certain tools there. But these are all quite new, and we're still trying to find out, what are the top 10 that directors need to know. So on the diploma in corporate governance, it's easier because that's my background, but
Right.
my background's not ESG, so we're trying to find tools that'll be helpful to directors. And one thing I would say, because it was something came out of our previous conversation, where do you start to become a non-exec director? Well, you need to have some governance qualification, in my view, but most boards in the world don't hire people with governance qualifications. They might hire people with great experience, like Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
Um, um, and where they might start, and they shouldn't wait till they're 50 or 55 or 60, they should be thinking this in their early 30s. Well, I try and get on board of a big non-profit who's a good brand,
Right.
and maybe try and get on one of their committees first to see if you like it, to see if they like you.
Right.
So if you're a CPA, you could get onto the finance committee there, and then perhaps say, well, I have an interest in going further over time. And because you need to look at the risk as well for you. Is this place well run?
Right.
Will your professional career be jeopardized if things go, belly up? And then get on the board there. But there should be brands that are well known, so you're easy to market with the better brands around you, and then progress depending on what your profession might be. So that's what we say. Some people could go, or you just might try, say, go to a private company and see if they need your skills or not.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
uh,
you need to be open to, I think you need to let people know you're open to those types of roles too, right? I mean, you got to start somewhere. And if you don't let people know you're interested, they're not going to know or think
Yeah,
of you.
yeah, and LinkedIn is a place to go. So if people are looking for people, your LinkedIn profile needs to be really SEO friendly. So if you're somebody who's an expert in, I don't know, risk or strategy, it's there. It's showcased. They can find you. But if
Well,
it's
yeah, I was watching one of the videos you had on your website. Anne-Marie Taylor was on, was interviewed, and she said, "Hey, look, if you're on LinkedIn in your about section, put it there that you're open to,
yeah,
non-executive, board roles, because those SEO searches will find you, and maybe you get a call. Who knows, right?
yeah, but I think you need to be, that's kind of the minimum standard. But I think you need to be out there, and if you have an interest in financial services or pharma or healthcare or forestry, you need to be pushing stuff out there.
Yeah,
Blog,
thought
speak,
leadership. Yeah, absolutely. You should be doing a lot of that.
conference, all the usual stuff, and so that makes you easier to find. And
Right.
that's what I did in my early days when I started a consulting company. I did made my level best to be president of anything because I get in the newspapers. Now it's much more difficult, um,
Yeah.
and much more sophisticated
Yeah.
in how social media works.
So, if you're an aspiring board member, and you want to get started, what type of skills should you look to obtain, specifically? I mean, should they try to have some experience in like managing a P&L, or, what are things that they should try to do to really, upskill themselves to be ready?
Well, if they come from an executive background, they'll have some functional skill. It could be finance, it could be marketing, it could be ops. But I think they're probably better placed if they have skills like finance, because boards are always looking for qualified accountants, whether
Mhm.
it's a non-profit or a sporting organization or a private company. It's, if you can read financial statements, you're in a much better position, because to many people around the boardroom table, that's like dark arts they just don't understand. And in particular, cash flow, which of course, pays the bills. Strategy is also a good thing to understand too, because, part of your role around the boardroom table is trying to figure out, if the executive bring forward the proposed strategy for the year or for the 3 years ahead or five, whatever it is, that you have the ability to ask good questions about that. Look, have you done good competitor research? Have you done a SWOT? Do we have the capability on that type of stuff? So I say finance and strategy, corporate governance, of course, it helps.
Right.
Um, but I think those are the kind of what I call the hard skills, and then there's the softer skills, which are you mentioned as we spoke the last time, mindful self awareness. But I think a key skill is the ability to be in the moment.
Right.
Oh, what I mean by that is, COVID came along and many boards just didn't know what to do.
Right.
Many boards didn't realize, okay, our CEO is now operating from her kitchen and she's supervising 8 people around the country who she's not going to see for an awful long time. And the chair is not, you know, um, paying enough attention to the CEO, not in contact enough. And, I've seen organizations like that not do well because the directors weren't in the moment. They didn't grasp the seriousness of the situation. Now,
Yeah.
albeit it was tough,
Yeah.
but being in the moment, it could be a crisis. It could be when, if you're on the board of, say, Volkswagen, when Dieselgate happened in the USA, it took them some time to get in the moment there and realize the implications of it.
Right.
And it
Right.
took some times later. And clearly you need to be, mindful. You need really good communication skills and the ability to be constructive. So I come across, I was talking to somebody today, she's the CEO of a big public body in Ireland where the board were too critical of what um, I suppose proposals they brought forward, and they say, "Well, I don't like this." They weren't
Mhm.
saying, "I disagree with you, and here's some options to think about." So it wasn't being constructive.
Right.
A non-exec director is constructive.
Right.
They don't have to agree with the executive all the time, but they need to offer opinion or other options, and that's what a good NED does.
Yeah. Have an alternative solution, or a recommendation to, maybe a position that you're not, in agreement with, so that that we can have an alternative here, right? They need to consider that. So that's a good opinion or observation there.
That's what they get paid for.
Yeah, I mean, right. And so they should be doing that because they're not bringing their value as a member if they're not, right? So
No, I
um
mean, in sorry to interrupt there, but in large organizations, the non-execs will undergo a performance review once a year, and then at the end of 3 years, when their term is up, typically, the nominations committee will say, "This person isn't delivering any value. We're not going to renew it." And that's the way it should be. It's about being.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, yeah. I mean, they have a job, and the board's evaluating them and for doing their job, and if they're bringing the value, then they'll be probably retained. But
Yeah, yeah.
right. I think, we're seeing a lot of changes in society and at business levels, and you know that's diversity in the directors of boards is really becoming a more mainstream initiative, I think, throughout the world, really. And so, talk about how important gender diversity or age and ethnicity and things like that are important to create an effective operating board.
So the place I would go is their strategy. What are they trying to achieve as an organization? And that's going to influence, the profile of the individuals you need around the boardroom table, from a skills point of view, diversity point of view. And I'm often asked, well, we need to be more diverse board. Well, I say, well, who's your customer base? What's the profile of your staff look like, and all that? And a lot of the time, they just don't know.
Mhm.
So that's not a good place to be.
Right.
So if you're selling food and you find out that, well, we're selling food into 3 or 4 different ethnicities, well, then you'd probably want some of those reflected in some shape or form on the
Sure.
executive team and or on the board.
Right.
Or if you're selling into different countries, you may want different types of people on the board. So if you're selling into Mexico, that's a very different market from the east coast of the USA.
Mhm.
um, and you need to understand the culture of that organization. So you need somebody on the board who understands that culture. It doesn't matter if they're male or female, but they need to understand that culture. So getting that diversity right is really important, because there's endless piece of research that said diverse boards make better decisions. So it's like if you if you're married, the man and the wife together will make a better decision than the wife and the husband individually, because they probably look at more views, and it's as simple as that.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, yeah, I think that's becoming a real needed, trend, and I'm glad to see there's a lot more initiative in that um, on board. So, some of the attributes that are essential for board members, we were touching on it earlier, but like emotional intelligence, trust, self-awareness, mindfulness, compassion. I mean, the ability of a board member to is a really good a networker, somebody who's got P&L experience or marketing experience. I mean, these are all skills and attributes that need to be identified in a board member. Is to be effective is what I understand. And talk about how important this really is for people.
Well, I think good board members, well, the first thing I do is prepare well for meetings, and they don't come unprepared. Um, in the selection of the board members, there's a much greater focus on their harder skills like strategy or governance than the soft skills. Um, so if you're putting a team together, I think you need to think about the soft skills too, and put potential directors through a process to understand. And I'm no expert in this, but Myers-Briggs is one particular model out there,
Right.
and we're typically all in one square of that. So you're bringing a group of people together who bring different, I suppose, personal attributes and characteristics, which makes the board a better place to be. And most of the big headhunt companies don't go that far. They generally hire, well, we need somebody with strategy background, not somebody who's great at strategy, but they're compassionate. You don't see that in the adverts. You just
Right.
see, we just need, a head of a board member who's a qualified accountant or whatever it might be. So that's the trickier piece there. And I think, nominations committee, I think, need to focus a lot more on that, because you don't want the same personality profile of everybody
Right.
on the boardroom table. That won't
Right.
work.
Right.
That won't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah, I've gone through the Enneagram. Maybe you heard of that one as well. That's another kind of Myers-Briggs type
Okay.
personality assessment, and that's a pretty interesting one there. And there's others, like you said. So it's good to have like a mix of different, A types, the introverts,
Yeah.
clerics, those type. I mean, you need these types of individuals that are on the boards that can really bring a full, a better outcome, as we mentioned. So I know you guys have been doing a lot of work in Europe. I think is where a lot of the I guess the leaders that are coming to the Corporate
Yeah.
Governance Institute. But talk a little bit about maybe your ability to expand over here in the U.S. market.
Yeah. So we've released some content in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and the third highest level of openings of that content has come from the USA, which has kind of got our attention. Now, it has been articles on Elon Musk and others, so it's all very topical. Um, but the fact they've opened it and read it is interesting. Um,
Right,
and why are they opening our content as opposed to perhaps somebody else's content, and perhaps nobody else produces? We don't know. But the USA is a big place. I mean, I think I've been to 20 of the states there in my time, and traveled there many times. So we need to understand East Coast versus West Coast versus the middle or the South. We need to understand that. And we need to understand, is governance more important in some states than others? I just don't know.
right,
But my feeling is that if we're to start, it'll be the East Coast. I think because well, there's a lot of financial institutions in New York, for example. There's a
right.
lot of
Wall
organizations.
Street's there. We've got a lot of
Yeah,
investment
and,
companies.
and then you have a lot of companies in the US registered in Delaware um, as well, which we found out. So we're still trying to understand that. We're reasonably close to NASDAQ and some of the people there, and they've said, look, there's no product like yours in the USA. And so we're probably going to use their informal advice as to how we might get there. But we need to do some research. We think it's ripe for development because in Europe, having a president as the chair and the CEO is just a no-no. It just doesn't fly. It goes against every principle of corporate governance, whereas in the US, that's quite common, as I understand. So we need to understand that to see if we need a slightly different product. I think it'll be broadly the same, but it might need to be tweaked a little bit.
Sure.
That's not just corporate governance. We think the ESG product will fly anywhere because it was
Yeah.
developed with 10 experts from 10 different countries around the world.
Yeah. I think, I think the ESG, certificates and diplomas that you guys are offering are going to be the biggest growth engines, more than likely. I mean, it is the top of mind for everybody in the industry here. Um, that
It's
I work.
certainly our lead product at the moment. It's just if we were a supermarket, there'd be no products left on the top shelf. I can tell you. So it's flying out the door. It's an easy sell. It's priced competitively, and we think we were first to market with an accredited self-paced product in the world that was online. So that helped. We just
Right.
we caught the moment, as they say.
Well, that's great. That's great. Well, David, how do listeners get a hold of you, or how can they get more information about the corporate, governance institute?
Well, just go to our website. It's www.thecorporategovernance.institute.com, and download a brochure. There's plenty of them there, plenty of choice. If they want to get hold of me, just go to my LinkedIn profile, David W. Duffy. I can't remember the rest of it, but
We'll put a link to your
yeah,
contact information on my website for sure.
or
So
just send me a letter, David Duffy, Ireland. It'll get to me.
I'm sure there's a lot of David Duffys in Ireland. But you know what? You guys, I think you have some newsletters people can sign up for, get some content from you guys as well, right?
Every week it goes out at 11 o'clock on a Thursday.
Okay.
And there's some great stuff in there. I mean, today, for example, we have a survey to rate your ability to understand technology in the boardroom. And it's done with an organization in the UK called Board Intelligence. So that's a joint venture to see, how comfortable are directors in the boardroom now with the technology that's used there. And there's 400 different types of technology you can use in the boardroom. It's amazing.
Oh, yeah. No, you need to stay up on technology to stay relevant. That's for sure in today's society. So in
Yeah.
business.
Yeah. If you rest, you rust, as they say.
That's right. That's fantastic. Well, look, David, hey, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. I think we've covered a lot of really good ground, explained a lot about, what corporate governance is, the diplomas and certificates that you're offering, how important ESG is to a board and to the growth of a company. Really appreciate you coming on board today, and we'll get your information out to the listeners. Really appreciate it.
Sean, thank you very much, and really appreciate the invitation. And I would say to anybody who wants to, do anything with this, they'll become part of an online global community, which I think will be unique in the world.
Absolutely. So let's look forward to continuing this conversation with you, David, over the course of the next year or so, and see how the progress of your company is growing. And who knows, I think I might have to sign up and get a certificate. So I'm looking forward to it.
There's a price for everything, Sean.
That's right. All right, my friend. Hey, take care. And
thank you.
you soon.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.